Hello and welcome to my channel, TFF Teacher from Finland. In the previous video, I talked about moral luck and moral responsibility. Here I continue talking about essentially the same issue, starting with merit and responsibility and continuing to the problem metaphysics causes to ethics by challenging our notion of fundamental responsibility. If you are interested in philosophical ethics, perhaps you should consider subscribing to my channel. We usually think that for someone to be responsible for what happened, whether the thing that happened was good or bad, it should not have been just a matter of good or bad luck. People are not thought to be morally responsible for pure accidents. If something happens by chance, it is thought that there is no moral judgment to be passed. We reserve praise and blame for situations where someone deserves either some kind of reward for doing something good or a punishment for doing something evil. A concept often used in this context is merit. For example, a meritocracy is the kind of, I would say, utopian society where the rulers are chosen according to their merits. It can also mean a system where, besides political power, also economic power, meaning wealth, is distributed according to merit. That might sound reasonable to you, even as ethically justified. If someone is smart, studies hard, becomes an expert in politics, history and economics, and becomes a skilled speaker and leader, you might think that the person deserves to be a ruler, and that they deserve to get a lot of money for just the kind of merit they have. It might seem even more obvious if you think of an opposite example. Think of someone who inherited a lot of money and knows a lot of important people, but was too lazy and stupid to actually bother to learn anything, to acquire knowledge and skills themselves. A person like that does not seem to deserve political power or great wealth. A person like that might get both easily, but I submit that at least most thinking people are likely to find this to be unfair and to even morally condemn such a person and the unjust political system where people like that get all the money and power. Merely having rich parents and the right connections is not quite the kind of personal merit that, say, a university degree is. One can passively benefit from having rich parents without making any effort. Making and especially benefiting from social connections doesn't seem like work either, and can seem pretty questionable. It stinks of corruption. To get a degree, you need to be smart enough, and you still have to work for it. More than anything else, it requires dedication. That is why cheating in exams or plagiarizing other people's work is one of the most despicable things you can do in the academic context. Merit is clearly one of those concepts that show the close connection between ethics and political philosophy. Our views on merit will necessarily inform our views regarding the good or ideal society. But what is merit? What counts as the kind of thing for which something is deserved? You have perhaps heard of the term birthright. Someone inherits a house from their parents. Did they deserve it? A lot of people would be inclined to agree that inheritance like that sounds reasonable at first, but what if there are more than one children in the family? In the past, in most of Europe and many other places as well, it was common for the eldest son to inherit the whole estate. It could have been a farm, or in the case of nobility, something like a county, or in the case of royalty, basically a whole country. You can probably see that this primogeniture doesn't seem fair to the other sons and especially daughters the deceased may have had. But more to the point, the inheritor did not have to do anything to earn the inheritance except to be born. They don't seem to deserve it. Similarly to the normal inheritance, some people claim that a certain people can have a right to a certain area. They can use ethnicity or even religion as the basis for their claim. But there doesn't seem to be any more merit in things like that. You could just pick your religion, claim to believe in it, and then claim that as a result you are entitled to live in a certain area. But even if you were born to parents from that area, that religion or that ethnicity, is there really any difference? Why would the people there deserve to own the land? On what basis? To really deserve anything, it seems you need to have done something to get it. That is why many people think that hard work is required, and someone working hard deserves to benefit from that hard work. Also, someone who has sacrificed a lot by serving in the military, even getting injured or killed while doing so, has earned something good for their sacrifice. At minimum, the gratitude of their fellow countrymen, for example. But of course, serving in the military may not really have been for a good cause. A soldier with good intentions may have been forced to fight in a war that is completely unjust, inflicting horrendous evil on not only enemy combatants, but also civilians. Wars tend to be especially horrible on civilians. Can one really consider being a soldier as merit, for which something good can be deserved? Many people seem to think that working more or less hard, or otherwise sacrificing one's time, or even health or life, is required to earn a living wage. The flip side of this is the unkind view that people who do not work do not deserve the basic necessities of life either, or should at least get only the absolute bare minimum required for survival. And to get even that minimum, the recipients of this welfare may be required to go through some arbitrary trouble and unnecessary hardship that does nothing productive, just so that they wouldn't get the benefits too easily. This underlines the point that people thinking this way do not think that humans deserve anything, even the basic necessities of life, automatically. That they do not, in effect, deserve to live. Rather, they think a person has to deserve the right to live. Only by doing some kind of work do humans deserve to live, then, according to these people. This view is, of course, in contradiction with the notion of human rights and other Enlightenment ideals. Funnily enough, people who oppose automatic benefits like universal basic income don't usually seem to object to the rich and the landowners getting money for nothing. Yet landowning is not a job, neither is owning stocks or other wealth. Neither requires the owner to actually do anything, to work at all. And this kind of unearned income is typically also taxed less than earned income from labor, and the rich can often avoid paying taxes, so that proportionally the poor pay more taxes than the rich. For example, the poor spend all of their money not being able to save any, and so a big portion of their income goes toward paying value-added taxes. There is a lot of injustice in the world, it seems. We do not typically get our just desserts. We do not get the rewards or punishments that we would seem to deserve. But even if we try to focus on merely attributing praise and blameworthiness based on moral merit, we quickly run into trouble. As morality is important to nearly all people, whether they realize it or not, and for the functioning of societies, we are usually quick to praise and blame the actions of others. We sometimes even go beyond individual acts by describing a person as a whole as good or evil. But as we have already seen in the previous video, it is difficult to see how the actions and even the character of a person can fundamentally be something we can consider merit. This is because our natural aptitudes, our psychological character, just like our physical features, is at least partially, and probably for the most part, a matter of luck. If we require our moral judgment to be based on something other than mere chance, also known as luck, then it becomes difficult how we can actually deserve anything. We certainly did not work for the genes and the gene expressions that we have. We did not choose and work to create the environment we grew up in. Yet it played a big role in shaping how we turned out. We did not sacrifice our labor, health, or time to form the society and culture we were raised in. Yet we could not even think conceptually without the language and other cultural tools and constructs that we adopted like sponges immersed in that culture. But what about individual, specific acts? Could we at least judge a single act's moral value? We could take the putative moral agent's background into consideration, the same way the legal system, at least ideally, considers various factors as mitigating circumstances, for example. What makes those circumstances mitigating is that they seem external to the person, some kind of outside influences on them. Perhaps we can make moral judgments informed by the knowledge of those circumstances. This is a sort of third-person point of view. It is where we can see that the person's behavior and character are at least strongly influenced, if not dictated, by all these factors. The problem is that it seems difficult to see anything in the person that is not strongly influenced by such outside factors. This is where we venture into the territory of metaphysics. From our individual, first-person point of views, we experience ourselves as actors, agents, making choices and decisions. These choices seem to be our own, freely made. This perspective is clearly at odds with the third-person point of view that we assume when thinking of or studying other people, and of course the view of science as well. In metaphysics, this is the cause of the debate about determinism and free will. I have made a video about that as part of my Introduction to Philosophy and Critical Thinking, and include a link to that below in the description. Without delving too deep into that debate, I will simply state that there are three basic views about it. 1. Free will is a concept used by those who prioritize the first-person point of view. They are called libertarians, but they should not be confused with political libertarians, so perhaps they should be called metaphysical libertarians in this context. Supporters of this view claim that somehow we are free to make choices and that we are responsible for our choices. In fact, the whole concept of free will is based on and supported with an argument that begins with the idea that we must be responsible for our actions. Because it is thought that this requires our choices to be our own, not caused by something outside of us, it follows that we must have a will that is free of causality. This view was held, among others, by Immanuel Kant, who called the problem an antimony of reason, meaning a problem that cannot be solved by reason. Kant also claimed that free will is a necessary postulate of practical reason, without which we could not hold anyone responsible for their actions. The view that we can sometimes act in a way that is not determined by prior states or events is called contra-causal libertarianism. For example, some have thought that A rational decision is a free decision, and it is not just some mechanically caused action, such as a reflex. Existentialists like Kierkegaard have insisted that it is not enough, that what really makes us humans is our ability to make radical choices in situations where the choice cannot be made rationally due to the lack of persuasive arguments that would rationally settle the matter. The point is that we may be forced to make such decisions, and those choices are free. The view that we are not caused to act in a certain way, but are, as agents, somehow free of the causal chain, is called agent causation libertarianism. 2. Determinism is based on the third-person point of view. It states that because we are part of nature, we obey the laws of nature just like everything else. All our actions are natural phenomena caused by previous events and conditions. There is no break in the causal chain. As far as I know, there isn't even a real theory of free will that would somehow explain what that elusive entity called will is supposed to be, and how it could possibly subvert causality itself. Because it seems like there can be no such thing as free will, it follows that we cannot be held morally, in the fundamental sense, responsible for our actions. This view has been endorsed by Ted Honderich and B.F. Skinner, among others. This type of determinism, which denies the compatibility of determinism with the idea of free will, is often called hard determinism to distinguish it from a view that allows for some kind of free will. 3. Compatibilism is the attempt to combine determinism with the idea of free will. The contrasting view is called incompatibilism, which is the view that free will and determinism are not compatible, so only one of them can be true. Compatibilism is mostly motivated by the desire to have a basis for moral judgment. Compatibilists accept that in a metaphysical sense, our behavior is determined, but as long as we are not constrained or forced in a more obvious manner, such as being under the threat of serious violence, we are free enough in the ethical sense. That, they say, is enough for morals and normative behavior. Even the best attempt to refute determinism could only suggest that there is an element of randomness, such as from quantum indeterminacy, in our behavior, but that is far from supporting the idea of a will that could meaningfully be responsible for behavior. If a person's actions were actually caused by completely random quantum mechanical phenomena, which is unlikely, it doesn't seem to make sense to then blame or praise the person for that behavior. The randomness, in fact, would seem to undercut the whole idea of moral responsibility, because then the real actor in question would not really be the person, but the strange random phenomenon. But the purpose of the moral judgment is not merely to assign praise or blame to acts after the fact, but perhaps even more importantly, to influence the choices of the moral agents before the acts are even committed. One could argue that the main purpose of the praise or blame is to influence behavior, and it does not matter whether people are able to freely choose their actions or not. What matters is that our normative behavior makes it more likely that people behave morally, perhaps precisely because of the causal power it has on people. Another reason to discard the idea that free will is necessary for moral judgment is that we can easily evaluate even inanimate things as good or bad. If your phone fails to work properly, you don't need to assume that it has a free will and is now acting against your wishes out of its own volition. It does not matter that it could not behave in any other way than how it does. You can still blame it for not functioning properly. You will most likely not consider your phone a person, and so you won't consider it to be a morally bad person, but does that matter? You will either find a way to fix your phone or get rid of it. Perhaps treating humans in a similar manner sounds dehumanizing, but we can see immoral behavior as similar to the faulty functioning of a machine. We can then try to repair the person, or if that fails to make them function properly or seems too unlikely to succeed, we can just store them in a prison where they are less likely to cause further harm. If the part about dehumanizing sounds dangerous, you should realize that it also might reduce unwarranted moral zeal in some cases. What I mean is that sometimes people are too eager to judge others, and usually do so with very limited knowledge of the facts of the case. That may lead to unnecessary, useless, and even harmful attitudes and actions, whereas the focus should perhaps be on just limiting the actual harm done. Treating people as imperfect or broken machines instead of diabolical evildoers might have a better chance of succeeding in that. That's it for now. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe, and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.